and here begins the final stage, the texture stage of the League of Extraordinary Crafters, and this is vital to creating that volume sort of look to things, so giving it a roundedness and a shape, using texture to fill in the difference between the shadow and the light areas. So I've begun on Lee Eddings' face here, working on the shadows, and because he has a bright light source behind his head and one just to the right of him there from Jeremy's spell that he's casting, there is obviously going to be a lot less texture because you've got those bright lights right next to him. But we will work on several different aspects of texture on him and also in this image as well. So the walls, where you've got the walls that don't have the light straight onto them, I'm going to use cross-hatching and lined textures to give a sense of texture and depth, and the variation in shadow intensity as well. So these walls here are not actually in deep shadow, that rather they are somewhat shadowed from the actual position of the light sources themselves. Now, obviously, this is sped up considerably, and this does take quite a lot of time. So the original video of this at 25 frames per second is over 45 minutes, and this that's at 5 frames per second originally shot at, so you multiply that by 5. So we're talking at about 4.5 hours or so this entire thing will take, even though this video is going to be 15 minutes long. So there's a significant amount of work that goes into this stage, and really this is where the magic happens. So this final stage is where everything kind of comes together, and it's important now to concentrate on how the textures are interplaying with the light, and also what kind of textures are actually going to juxtapose with the various different things in the foreground and the background. So we've got a lot of light on the hammer, and you've got the shadow behind the cross-hatching, so the hammer now kind of jumps out of the image, which it didn't really do so before. And we're going to do the same thing with the rest of the textures behind the central figures, especially on the left-hand side. That needs quite a lot of work to help them jump out. And what you'll see me doing now is adding in little details, little cracks in the stonework and things like that, that again are just selling the actual material of the objects in the background. Working on the shadows on the skin. Now, you may not be able to see it in this video unless you're watching it very large, but I'm actually using hundreds of little dots whenever I'm on the skin there. I don't always do skin that way. Sometimes I do it with other texture, but in this one I wanted to do hundreds of little dots. So it's a bit of a pointillist technique, and that gives the shadow a slightly different feel against the skin than you would have with the various different garments that people are wearing in this. So each garment is going to have its own style of texture, and we'll go through that as we go. So on Jeremy's arm there, we use some straight lines. On mine, there's a lot of squiggly sort of lines to give it a leather sort of look to it. It's almost like a reflection, a light reflection plus a texture to it. Again, on the skin, I'm using the dots, and in the hair, I'm using lines and curved lines to get the sense of the actual hair that's there. And then the all-important shadows to complete the depth of the dagger there. So you'll see the dagger now pops out a little bit more because of the texture behind it, the light source coming from the left-hand side. And I'm using, I wanted that coat that I'm wearing to have a woolen sort of texture to it. So that's why I've used little circles to create that sort of rough woolen look to it that the thief would have in his padded cloak. Contrast that with the actual sword and with the undergarments, so the leather undergarments and on the legs and the arms. So you get a contrast in actual fabric and the actual feel of the texture. Now on Lee's legs there, I'm going with a more sort of natural woven material, and I'm using a sort of a strange technique. It's actually not normal cross hatching, but it's actually squiggle lines instead of straight lines. So that gives that sort of skirt that the barbarian is wearing a very distinctive sort of natural woven fiber feel to the texture. And then you contrast that with the skin, which is the pointless dot technique. So you actually sense that the material is actually different between the different things. So now with the wizard's cloak and all that sort of thing, the wizard's cloak may be of a much higher quality. So we're using straight lines for that, and to give it a different look to the barbarian's cloak or skirt, or what's the Scottish thing? I forgot. Kilt. That's it. Kilt. So of course then we also have to contrast that with the hair as well. So the hair we're using straight lines, and we have to remember the different qualities of hair as well, and how the head differs across the head, and then working into the spaces with the dots for the skin, again trying to keep the light source in mind as to where that is, and not going overboard with a shadow because you've got a very bright light source. And then a slightly different texture on the little sort of moccasin shoe that the wizard is wearing, and that contrasts against his robe. So then we move on to Wylock, the elf ranger, and again using the pointillist on the skin, and we're going to do the same technique that we used for the barbarian's kilt. We're going to use that technique in the cloak for the elf ranger, and I'm also adding in the strings for the bow as well. So thin black lines, and then using a thicker pen to define that. And you'll see me just now I'll use a white gel marker in order to get the light bouncing off the string of the bow as well. So as you can see, there's a lot of different texture details. I'm just using here on the sword to give the sword a lot more volume. Thinking of different textures on the hilt and on the metal parts of the sword. Then you've got the boot of the barbarian. My brain's not functioning today. It's too hot in this room. And then you've got now the foreground of these demonic creatures, which there's a lot of different things happening there in terms of the teeth and the tongue and the skin and the hair and the follicles and all that kind of stuff. And as I said in the previous video, I move around the image and work on different spaces so that I'm not continually doing the same texture across. So I vary things up so that I don't start to repeat myself as I go through the image. So that's why you'll see me go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And also when you get tired of doing a certain thing and you want to move into something else and come back to it, or you have an idea and you want to come back to that. So you can see now there was a little bit I did under the barbarian's arm that kind of separated him more from the background. And there I just added in Lee's tattoo, which is on a different part of his arm. But I added that in there as per his request. And that's of a dragonfly. So here again, using the dot pointlist technique on the hand of the demon creature. And obviously it takes quite a while when you're doing hundreds and hundreds of little dots. But it's one of my favorite techniques for creating shadow and texture volume as well. It works really well. So there, added a bit more shadow on that sword. Now, when I talk about things popping out of my illustrations, there's two key things that have popped out in this one. And one is the sword. I'm very happy with the sword and the way it's just really has a three-dimensional look to it. You feel like the sword is actually far away from the other the other people in the image, even though it's on the same plane. That I'm very, very happy with that. And then obviously the hand to the wall, that also pops out quite nicely as well. And also the bow, the shadow work on the bow on the left hand side in the elf's hand, that has come across very, very well. So you get a really good sense of depth. I'm quite happy with overall the quality of the depth in this, even though we haven't even finished texturing the image. So again, it's a lot of working and reworking just to get everything right, making sure all the figures and everything are correct, going over some of the areas with the white gel pen just to give some highlights and separation with that sort of halo effect. The halo effect is very useful in terms of separating objects from the environment, and also to get a sense of depth as well. So you would see this in photos as well. There's oftentimes little light halos and stuff, especially if it's been well lit and it's using a specific lighting technique. You will get that sort of haloed edge that separates the figure from the background. So it doesn't seem unnatural. It does happen in nature. It happens obviously more so in film because it's forced, but it does work and it looks very nice. So working on the demon faces, using a combination of dots and lines to get the texture of the skin and also the hair and that sort of thing that is very prominent in these figures. And yeah, the skin, I've started to add more blemishes to the skin, a lot of like sort of blemish birthmarks and things like that into the skin, to give it a little bit more interest. So you'll see the sort of age marks and things like that all over the forehead of these things. And then I'm using a pencil to just pencil in the brickwork and where it will be for the rear wall and the floor on the left hand side. And then we'll go over it with an ink the whole thing. But obviously the pencil, if I make a mistake, it's just in pencil, so it's easy to erase. So then working in with the fine lines and details of the separated bricks to give the brick texture happening in the background. And then after that, we'll then work in again with the cross-hatching techniques and that sort of thing to get it to the look that we want to match the walls on the right, and also to give it some more volume rather than being quite flat. I mean, obviously the image looked very good before. There's nothing wrong with the image as it was with just the deep shadow. It worked perfectly well. But this, as you can see, as this image is building up, the detail work and the shadows and all that sort of thing is bringing this whole sort of background stairwell and all that sort of thing is coming to life. More shadows, cracks, different types of textures, enhancing the lighting a little bit more. This all works towards the same goal of creating this tenebrism effect, or high contrast lighting. And you have to consider when you're drawing the lighting that obviously the texture is created by the light falling on the object and shadows. So it's very important to realize that the texture is basically just there could be a lack of light, and that's giving you the actual texture that's there. So you're painting with light effectively. Even though, I mean, this is an illustration, not really a painting, but you're really using the light as a way of creating the image rather than just a bunch of lines. So I just went around the spell that Jeremy is casting there, just so that you can actually notice that it actually jumps out now rather than being sort of lost against his clothing. But we're now down to the final area of the floor in the front. There's not much left to go. The background behind the elf is looking very great. It's very, very nice. I'm very, very happy with that. There's, it's this very satisfying feeling where everything kind of falls together and works. And then there's a lot of detritus and stuff on the floor that I'm adding in, and using a few different little cross-hatching techniques to just finalize the image. So, and then just going over a few little things with the gel white pen just to pop it out a little bit more. So this is the image, and then we work with the tone, the levels, curves, etc., and bring out the blacks. As you can see here, as it transitions, so it brings out the black and keeps the white, and that is exactly what I love about the look of these drawings, is that sort of high contrast lighting, and you end up with a fabulous result. Lee is very pleased. I have already posted this off to him, and you would have obviously seen it. If you're a member of the Tabletop Crafters Guild Facebook page, you would see it's being used in there, and it's been used in our inaugural announcement videos. So I'm very happy with this drawing. If you're interested in some of my art, you can have a look in the links below in the description. I have been putting things on Redbubble, so you can actually get these on throw pillows and mugs and clothing and that kind of stuff. And I've ordered some of them myself, and they look really, really great. So thank you for joining me. I will see you in the next video. Please consider subscribing, like, and share with your friends if you find this interesting. And thank you very much for watching.